Welcome, everybody, to Artful Tuesdays. My name is Kirk, and I'm joined by Anne, Shoshana, and Jeff today, while we are going to talk about Red Pawn. Now, this is the second time we're talking about Red Pawn, but this time we're going to focus a little bit more on the story, the characters, and maybe some other things related to what's actually happening within the world that Ayn Rand created. And we just wanted to start real quick by saying, you know, if you haven't read Red Pawn, go read Red Pawn as soon as you can. And we will probably have some spoilers though today, so I want to make sure you know that. However, I was thinking about this, about why you should read this if you haven't read this. If you love Ayn Rand, right? And I think Anne Ciccolella said this last time, this is new stuff. So like, I know a lot of people who are fans. I remember this back in the day of Tupac. And then he died, and there was all these songs from Tupac that came out, and everybody was so excited. It's the same thing here. Is you have an artist that you accept, Ayn Rand's, greater artist, but you have a great artist that you love, and she has new stuff out there that you can go read. So if you loved We the Living, Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, you need to go read Red Pawn. Okay, there's my pitch for those who haven't read it. This is an amazing story. I was very inspired by this story when I read it. And if just as a quick little synopsis of what's happening, we're on an island in a Russian communist prison, Strasnoy Island. There's a commander, Karayevov, and I mispronounced his name again. I knew I was going to do that. And he is lonely. He invites a state-issued wife. He gets a state-issued woman. She happens to be in love or married already to one of the prisoners, and she tries to break him out, and all kinds of romantic triangles and things occur there in a very Randian way. Okay, so that's the essence of the story, or my essence. I'm sure you guys could synopsize it a little bit more, but going into the stories, what do you guys think is the major theme or importance of this story, or any insights that you have into the story of Red Pawn?
I just want to say, I just find it extremely suspenseful. All three characters, I think, are really interesting. Michael, the husband, the commandant himself, and of course, Frances, the woman. I just think they're terrific characters. I did want to bring up the red in Red Pawn. That is, this time, the word red kept coming up. And of course, blood is red, and red is the symbol of the Communist Party and all that. But one of the things, and Dr. Peikoff may have said this in his introduction, is who is the Red Pawn? That kind of changes as we go through the story.
Like who is the pawn and which one of them is the... Well, so do you guys have an answer for that? I mean, I guess I have an immediate thought that's easy, but I'm curious what Jeff, Shoshana, do you have a thought of who the Red Pawn is?
Well, I think that one of the reasons it's there is because, with chess, ordinarily we've got black and we've got white, and this time we've got red. Ordinarily the pawn is what is sacrificed, because you can do without a pawn, you can't do without the king. But I think that the implication here is that there's someone who is in the service of something else, and they talk about sacrifice, and sacrifice within this setting doesn't mean what Ayn Rand used it to mean later on. Later on, Ayn Rand meant by sacrifice the giving, the relinquishing of a greater value, for a lesser one. That's a sacrifice. And here, it's more the way it is in chess, that something lesser can be relinquished in order to achieve something greater. I guess you're thinking that, which of the characters is the pawn. But I don't think that you could say, well, it can't be Michael, because he's not the one who's acting here. And it's funny, the character Karev, she got the name from one of the professors at her university, but in my head, I call him the Beast until at the end, of course, he's noble, he's not the Beast anymore. But I think if you think of him as the Beast, you've got, an image of him as both not fully human until he changes, and he keeps talking about the years of his life that he's given for the cause, and then comes to realize what his life is. And of course, you have a pawn in chess can change identity. Can be queened. And so it's as if when she arrives, she is, he thinks that she's there for one purpose, and we recognize that she's there for another. And the question is, what's going to be her final purpose by the end? So I think that what Anne said about it's being suspenseful is correct, because even when you recognize what sorts of values are important to Ayn Rand, you might not necessarily know how this one's going to end, because it's a lot. It has, should we say, it's got some of the same DNA as We the Living, but there's more to a human being than the DNA, and we don't know what the choices are going to be of the different people, and it all builds up to that.
But I guess Kareyev changes more than anyone. I mean, to a certain extent, Joan, Frances, whichever name you want to use, is the same person. She does change. She doesn't expect to fall in love with him, and that's what happens. But he really does give up his idealism for love, for a new idealism. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, I think that it's interesting that he is a beast, but he's provoked into being more human, or her presence enables him to deal with aspects of himself brought to the fore by her involvement and her probing, that makes him transforms him, or gives him an opportunity to step forward with more of what is true of him as a developed person, rather than true of him as a duty. And I think that's interesting. And that's something that I think would appeal to Ayn Rand at this time, especially in the ramp up to the character of Leo in We the Living, who is also a character that unfolds with self-discovery provoked by a woman who loves him.
I wanted to read a little bit of dialogue. Kirk has said before, there's a lot of visual stimulation in this piece, in this novelette. But I wanted to just read that little bit of dialogue about the beast. In my little version, it is page 164. But have you heard what I'm called, the beast? You may find I deserve the name. You may find I like it. No use telling me about it. If you do, I don't care what you think of me. Then why warn me about it? Because the boat's still here. It goes back at dawn. There's no other for 3 months. She had lighted a cigarette and she held it in 2 straight fingers, looking at him. Were you in the Civil War, Comrade Kareyev? Yes. Why? Did you acquire the habit of retreating? No. Neither have I. I just think that's so Ayn Rand. I just love that little.
Well, there's the sharpness of Ayn Rand. Like that's again, like if you like Ayn Rand, you should read this, right? Because you get some of the beauty of Ayn Rand's work that you don't get in other, that you don't get outside of her work. And this is another that work that you got. And yeah, I didn't think about the connection. It seems like a simple connection, Jeff, but it's a really profound one to me. The idea that the beast is the beast. He's kind of savage. He's just like the way I picture him is just like he's all cut up and he's scarred from war and he's brutal. Like there's a scene later on when there is actually some action, not a ton. It's not an action movie, but there's some shooting and it's pretty intense. And Michael, I guess you learned who's the actual husband and the prisoner. He has never been in war, right? And there's a kind of respect all of a sudden that the brutal warrior sees something in this other guy as well. But the beast is just, he's like a pure warrior, brutal killer. That's why they have him on this island. He's the only one strong enough to survive on an island with all these prisoners and maintain control. because he's not fully human. Like he's just for other people. And by falling in love, it's, with this woman, he becomes more human, like you're saying. I think that's really profound. And it's interesting, and this is something to bring you guys in on this and what's happening, because like if I'm a really critical of Ayn Rand here, and I'm reading this story, there's a scene when the beast all of a sudden, and this is toward the second half or toward the end, he's all of a sudden speaking in kind of individualistic tones. Like he's saying, this is mine, I want my life. And when I first read it when I was much younger, it sort of came out of left field to some degree. Like I didn't know that there was quite enough development. And then, but as I understand it, and the way I think about it now is this is a movie script. And there is development. It is there, by the way. I think it's interesting. Like, what do you all think about the transition that he has to go through and how you would visually show that, and the kind of person you would need to be as an actor and portraying this to really, because like when he's at the beginning, he's totally a communist, right? And you have like 30-45 minutes to turn him into an individualist. And I found that like, it's there in the script, but it's still a massive challenge, I think, to show that. And I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that transition.
Well, for one thing, we're told that there's a period of time going by. Okay, so we actually have not been watching everything that's happening. That's one. Second, she's quite an unusual woman, and within the story, her love of beautiful things and of luxury is a stand-in for cherishing the things of this world and life, things like that. And again, I mean, when you look at if you're from, everybody knows We the Living, and we have things like that, and Andre hearing the music and, that's something lovely, and being entitled to buy things that he can give to Kira that he had never been interested in luxuries like that. And actually, if you go over to Atlas Shrugged, we've got something like that too, just saying. I think, in fact, he reminds me quite a bit of Andre, in the sense that it's not just the woman who is the agent for his change, but he's feeling for the woman and for their relationship.
Right.
And I think that what's kind of striking is that it's not that she makes big speeches to him. It's that it's experiential. And I think that's, as you were saying, it's something within himself that answers to this new experience, and that you could say that one might have expected that she would be lowered by the experience of her months on the island, but in fact, he's the one who is ennobled by it. That's sort of the way the story works. Now, I think you understand that this is a work that exists in a few different forms, that there was the idea for the film, and there is, information about that. But what we actually have here is the literary version, where it's not communicated entirely in dialogue, but rather in description, which sort of thing we're familiar with from fiction. Now, of course, when you think about Ayn Rand's work, We the Living's a novel. It's also a play. Just saying. Anthem is a novella. It's also, the radio broadcast and a play. The Fountainhead, also a movie, and someone else, turned it into a play. And then there's Atlas Shrugged, which is a novel, and she was going to turn it into a film. So she's got the ability to imagine the bones of a story being developed in different forms. And I'm sure you know this, that Jeff talked about last time, that she wrote this, for fiction, but also later on, after Atlas Shrugged, she even had the idea of trying to sell it as, as a work of fiction. She was going to write a full-length work. And so just saying, and I would have liked to read that one. I think that, with her at the height of her powers and changing this story, because it's not just about Russia. And we were talking about that earlier, that she had two other versions of the story that she was trying to sell to the movies. And one's got Poland and one's got Spain. But it's got the same notion of there being a woman and two men, one of whom is the embodiment of very bad ideas, and the other one who is the man of her love and the man of her heart, whom she's trying to rescue, and yet who within the narrative has a somewhat secondary part because she's the one who's rescuing him.
I want to say something about the transformation. I don't see, I mean, I know they call him the beast. I just don't see him as all that bestial, but I feel like Rand is very sensitive to tactile images, to visual images. So that's part of, I think we just started to say that, that's part of his change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the aesthetics. And I feel like we get some of that in Atlas. I mean, if you really read Atlas carefully, it's stunning in terms of its description and imagery. And that changes him. So he falls in love with the woman, but it's all of the surrounding material around her that lures him into being more sensitive and so on.
I have to correct myself. I said earlier I
know
Leo instead of Andre.
Yeah.
I meant Andre.
Yeah, I know.
But I wanted to bring up something that just occurred to me, and I was reading on another topic, some commentary of Ayn Rand's about the possibility of creating a character who is a committed communist as an adult, and whether that can really sustain. And I don't know that I think it was her view that even Andre and We the Living was not, it was truly fiction, from a psychological perspective. It was her projection of a kind of person that she didn't think really would sustain and develop that way at all past the age of 12 or 16. I mean, she just wasn't convinced that someone could, carry the ideas of communism to full development and have the kind of opportunity for redemption as an adult. I think that would be the takeaway. So when you're dealing with revisiting this, at the height of her literary powers, I'm wondering if there was a challenge there. How do you make something that you're not committed to 100% existentially, but have dealt with to your satisfaction literarily? How can you revisit that? Especially when you've just come off of having created and sustained over almost a decade and a half the building of a world that really matched your mountains, was your mountain, and communicated positive things about positive characters that she thought were important to say something about. So that was a hard act to follow.
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent point, Jeff. And because of our culture, our view of communists is so much softer. If you replace this with a Nazi and really make him to the nth degree a Nazi, and then say, how is he going to turn around after he's done these terrible things? You'll understand better what Rand was seeing. We just see them as, people who really wanted nice things for other people. I just think you've got to see it from that point of view of what she really experienced in terms of talk about brutality, talk about the beast of what the Communist Party did to millions of people.
And the amount of evasion that would be sustained by an adult, it's hard to reconcile that with the kind of rich transfiguration that you conclude this character Kareyev, that concludes the character and its arc at the end of the story. It just is, that's a lot to you know, really take. You can think of people, you know, evading and doing so artfully, but their energies go into the artfulness of their evasions, and the noose gets tighter and tighter. It's like, you know, there's only so much inventiveness that you can perform as a chronic evader. I guess that's Ripley at the end of The Talentedness, the film version at any rate, where darkness encircles him. And certainly is the case in Judgment at Nuremberg with the jurist who is in his cell at the end, you know, with his alone and enveloped in the thoughts of the things that he actually did that has now put him in jail for the rest of his life.
Well, and when you deal with Karev at the end of the novel, she really, meaning the character of Frances Joan, falls in love with him in a really deep way. I mean, I feel like when he does what he does, she really goes to the next level of depth for him and loves him in a way that she didn't before. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but that's what I felt.
Well, I think it's absolutely. Go ahead, Shoshana.
Yeah, I was going to say that part of his previous life had to do with not being impulsive, with figuring out what his values are and no choice. This is what I'm going to do, and not, I don't know, I feel like eating the ice cream, I'm going to enjoy that or whatever. No, he doesn't do things impulsively. And even his association with Joan Francis, that's not impulsive either. He thinks about it as it's happening. And then you could say the next level is, well, that's what the commander is going to do. You know, as before, he was dedicated to, well, it was a mistake, you know, it's a terrible mistake and blood in his hands and all of that, but that's what he saw as what he was committed to. Well, now he's committed to her. He's committed to her, and there's only one way that can go. You know, he wants to he would like to rescue her and have a life together, but that's not what she wants.
Well, it's also wonderful that he seems to believe that for a long time.
Yeah.
It's not till the very end that he's like, oh.
Well, she convinces him.
Yeah, I mean,
she convinces him, and it's convincing when you're reading it. That's what I think you're picking up on, is that's part of the suspense, is when she's talking to the beast toward the end to help with this escape plan after Michael screws it up the first time even. And she's like, look, let's just help him get out of here so I can be free of him. I love you. And it's convincing. And you're like, wait a second. Is she for real? Right? Like maybe she does love. And I think part of it is because she does love him. And I sometimes wonder, there's a scene toward the end when they're in a shack and they've been trapped in a shack. And I think that's the moment when they say, you have to choose now. And then she stands up, and I don't know if she 100% knows who she's going to choose, but then it's this wonderful, only Ayn Rand would do it like this, of course, when, you know, there's a wounded person and she jumps on that person. And then she says, that's my husband. In this case, pointing to her husband means the guy that's going to go off and get executed. And I won't tell who that is, but you can go read it to find out. But point is that, like, you know, I don't know if Joan, do you guys think this? Like, I don't know if she 100%, I think she kind of knew, maybe she did, and maybe I'm wrong about this. I don't know if she knew 100% who she was going to go with until the very end, until she saw that person. What do you think?
Well, I think she knew, because I mean, she's got a plan, and then Michael, as you put it, screws it up, and so she's got to have a new plan. And I think that one of the things that Ayn Rand does, which is clever, is that she creates some maybe uncertainty in the mind of the reader about is Michael really worth all of this? Yes,
that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah,
and it's so frustrating. He's like right there, and he like takes his glove off, and then he runs over, like, get your hands off my wife. It's like, dude, you were out the door. Get out of here. And sorry, I was just but you're right. That's 100% how I felt.
So she's got to come up with a new plan. This is a persuasive new plan that can achieve what she wants. We've got that man on the outside who can be an ally. And I think that part of what we've seen all the way through is that she has the ability to keep her own counsel and to calmly plan what she needs to do in order to get what she wants.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's also true that she didn't expect Michael to kick up the fuss that he does early on, and et cetera, et cetera. But, you can understand he's been there for some time, and she didn't have a chance to send him an email before all of this started, so he would be alert to what was happening. And
well, she's very convincing, and Michael believes it. I think at some point, like he believes, like, who do you love? Like you broke his faith. How maybe you broke my faith, and he kind of starts to lose a little bit of faith. And I think it is I could be sympathetic of a guy living in Strathnoy Island to lose a little faith. Like it could be a little, harsh on a person, especially the way Ayn Rand describes
I want to
it.
bring up, Rand is so great at giving portraits of some of the small characters.
Mm-hmm.
So the other people on the island, even, the Tui like evil guy, but the aristocrats, the prisoners, she really speaks so kindly of them, and they're not heroes at all. But the dancing lights, that music, there are so many wonderful Ayn Rand touches. I mean, we're focusing on the three main characters because that's what we're focusing on. But I just want to say to everybody, there's a lot of really well-drawn characterization, I think, in it.
And what does that say about her in her temperament? I think it says something interesting
About Rand?
About Ayn Rand herself. And I think it may indicate, I'm just probing here, just thinking off the top of my head. It's a kind of benevolent attitude that she has that would enable her to pull out of characters that you wouldn't associate with her necessarily elements that are admirable, and elements which in this situation are, they could have been foils, they could have been, barbs, but they're things that are elevated about what she pulls out of these characters and displays that, shows you, I guess, what is really important for her, and even in the small details. I mean, that's just something I
just focus on life.
Touching. I'm with you, Jeff. I feel like, we see her as very ruthless and judgmental, which she is, but she's also kind to people who deserve kindness. And we see that in We the Living as well. To some people, she is quite ruthless, in that apartment building when they all divide up the apartments and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, that shows what she was like as a person, that she was judging, but judging in a way that was truthful, not just, okay, you're off the list, you're on the list.
Well, I think also that these are people who were enemies of the state. So they have to have something going for them.
Oh, that is true. That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Shoshana.
No, it's just and some of them, are basically opposed to her because they think that she's cozying up to the beast, and they condemn that. And so I'm not listening to your radio, sort of thing. And these are positive things about them. I think that Fedosich, he's a bad guy, but he's part of the establishment, and he is never redeemed. Just saying, he's one of our obstacles. But I think that the other people, they're individualized, and you get the idea that each one of them, in his own way, can make a judgment about her. And it's not as if she's trying to be popular with them, but she has something to impart that is good for their spirits. And yet, if they're actually bad, they won't respond to it. It won't mean anything to them.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Hey, Daniel and Kirk, are there any questions, comments, or any?
No.
Okay.
I'm watching. Good. So there's so I had a question about. Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
No, this might change the direction of our conversation.
Is it going to be about the story though?
Well, I mean, it's a question because we were talking about adaptation, and So I had a question for, adapters and writers, adapters and directors here. How would you stage this? Is a question I thought might be interesting to hear answered from those who are in that arena.
Sure. Well, I was kind of saying to Shoshana earlier, I almost think there's nothing that cannot be theatricalized on stage. That, people think, oh, well, you need a whole mountain range to do some of these things and so on. But in fact, when you read Ayn Rand's We the Living script, I think the most problems with that script is the way it was materialized. That is, Boris Aronson made overblown scenery, is what we understand when we read it. So Shoshana and I were talking before we started about Jane Eyre from the National Theatre of Great Britain, which takes the novel in all its colors and stages it in ways that provoke your imagination. So I would love to try, it may be that after I tried, I'd say, well, it can't be done, but I'd love to take a crack at dramatizing on stage this script.
Yeah, well, I think that either you'd have to have some of the contrast between the spareness and the darkness and the ugliness and the beauty and light and music and so on. And you could either have things that suggest that, or you could just have people responding to it. I saw a show the other week in which there was it's called Only Gold, Love is the Only Gold, in which there was an issue about jewelry, but there wasn't actually any jewelry there. Just here it is, and there was nothing there. But we saw how people reacted to it, and that worked fine. I think, in fact, it would have been something of a problem if we'd had jewelry there that didn't impress us sitting in the audience.
Right.
Yeah, but instead, there it is. It's something beautiful, and we see it. And I think we do need some kind of, depending on what our resources are, mise en scène to suggest what that island looks like.
Well, there's certainly contrast and juxtaposition of cracks revealing distances and stone surfaces behind which are fluids in the distance, and that there are some very interesting figurative contrast to a dragon's mouth or the icons of the church and so forth, that with a few pauses and something that flares up as a contrast can be really sharply essayed on stage, and it would really be exciting to see people speaking in front of or in the midst of. I would find that very exciting staging possibility.
Yeah,
well, the climax of We the Living, we get the thread of light. We have dawn starting, and we have a light effect at the end of We the Living for the stage production as well. I'm sorry, Shoshana, you were going to say.
Yeah, I was just going to mention there's a British company called Original Theatre, and they do shows in theaters and so on, but they also, during the pandemic, filmed things and put them online for us to see. And they had one, I think it was called Into the Night, and it was about the episode of the Penley lifeboat, if you're familiar with that story. And if you aren't, you might want to actually watch this thing, because as you're watching it, you see this heroic rescue unfolding, and you really want it to work. And you believe that there's a boat, that there's water, when of course there isn't, and they're just doing it there with the sounds and so on. But if they could do that over, I don't know what their technology is, but I thought it was quite adept. And I think probably,
what was the title?
I think it's called Into the Night. It's about the Penley lifeboat episode. That's how you'd find it, and it's Original Theatre. And I've seen a lot of their shows, and they're with a lot of Anton Lesser. They're good actors, and I think they've made very good use of the medium. And I was kind of stunned that they were able to do the Penley lifeboat. They did one of the Apollo missions in which we actually feel as if we're in space. And
Cool.
So I've never seen them in front of me, but I've seen them on my computer, and I think they do a nice job with that. Now, we were going back to the idea of how you embody things, and I think that Ayn Rand's idea of using Marlene Dietrich was a really good idea. When I read this, I picture Marlene Dietrich just, with the way she walks, the way she talks, the way her confidence and so on. And you probably know this, but that was the one she had in mind. But I'm pretty sure that she'd seen Marlene Dietrich in Song of Songs, if you know that movie, where she plays, the part that sort of stood out for me is that she plays someone who, as part of this complicated story, becomes the model for a sculptor. And it's a nude sculpture.
Yes.
And she's like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, where have you seen that one before? And you can look it up. You can look for clips of it. But we know that sculptor. Scarpitt, I think, was the name of the sculptor who did it. But it's the timing is about right for it to be the Dominique pose in the fountainhead. I did not mean to. I certainly wasn't going to take off my clothes and give you the nude. But
I do. Now that you say that, I do remember, and I just learned that recently. But yeah. Well, I hope we've inspired some people to read.
We do have a question from
reread
Kathleen. Thank you, Kathleen, for your £10. I bought the adapted graphic novel. I haven't read it. I didn't like the format or quality. Is there a better original story or novel format? So just real quick, Kathleen, we're actually talking about the Early Ayn Rand. Please buy that book and read that. That is a literary version by Ayn Rand herself. And you're not going to ever do better than Ayn Rand herself.
Well, I had no idea. Jeff, did you know there was a graphic novel?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is done through the Atlas Society. But anyway, so there's this version here that's Ayn Rand with beautiful prose, great dialogue. It's an Ayn Rand story, and that's what we were saying at the beginning, is that, and
a wonderful introduction from Leonard Peikoff.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Thank
Anything
you,
else?
Kathleen.
Jeff, Shoshana, any other thoughts on?
Well, did you want me to read a passage? Or?
I would love to hear a passage.
Sure. That's a great way to end.
Okay. All right. Well, this is
Rand's own words.
Right. Well, this is the dinner where Michael is the waiter, and they're celebrating the 3-month. It's not exactly the anniversary, 3-month duration, and he says to her, "I'll bring everything you want here. I'll make this island for you what you make it for me." And then she says, "What I've made it for us." And then he says, "I don't like that word. I've served it for such a long time for us. We, the people, the collective, the millions. I've fought on barricades for us. I fought in the trenches. I've shot at men, and men have shot at me. For us, for them, for those countless others somewhere around me. Those for whom I've given a lifetime, my every moment, my every thought, my blood, for us." I don't want to hear that word, because now it's for me. You came here for me. You're mine. I won't share that with anyone on earth. Mine. What a word that is when you begin to understand it. And she says, "Comrade Karyev." Now, of course, what's gorgeous about this dramatically is that there's Michael, and oh no, okay, because he doesn't want to hear about mine. And there was a scene earlier where she told him a woman could promise a lot and not deliver. And well, I don't know exactly how that has worked out over 3 months or what he thinks, but that's what she told him. But here's Karyev, and he says, "Yes, Comrade Karyev, tomorrow and after tomorrow and for many days to come, but not tonight. I can have one night for my own, can't I? Look, I ordered all this for you by wireless. I've money in the bank at Nijini Kalinska. My salary had nothing to do with it for 5 years. I guess it wasn't money alone that I've been missing for 5 years, for more than 35 years. And then she says, "It's never too late while one lives. if one still wants to live. It's strange, Joan, he says. I've never really known what it was to want to live. I've never thought of tomorrow. I didn't care what bullet ended me or when, but now for the first time, I want to be spared. Am I a traitor? One cannot be a traitor to anything, she says, except to oneself.
This is right out of We the Living, though, isn't it?
Yeah, except it's also
Absolutely.
right out of Red Pond, you know. And
Yeah.
And it's right out of love letters later.
Oh, Daniel is encouraging us to tell people if they want to chat with us on Clubhouse, that's where we're going.
okay.
Yeah, we'll go to Clubhouse next.
Yeah.
All right. Well, great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for Artful Tuesdays and our second discussion of Red Pawn. Please go and purchase the Early Ayn Rand. If you have any specific questions or you want to talk about this, we will be going to Clubhouse right now. Thank you.
Yay.